So that's where I thought we would talk about today. And I think part of this is the pressure all these companies are going under with not knowing whether the U.S. is going to go into a recession or not. Public companies are putting more scrutiny than ever on their EPS and worried about discretionary spending. Should we spend it or not spend it? And look, sometimes if they're a public company and you're talking about 2.5 million, that could be enough where someone basically is told, we got to see how our own quarter shapes up before we go spend that 2.5 million, which they can't turn around and tell you because as a public company, they can't talk about where they are in their earnings cycle. So the goal is, given all of that, how do I, when I'm still got the buyer's ear, how do I gain clarity as to what will happen? And I wouldn't necessarily, I say there's two parts here. How are you going to make the decisions? You talked about one opportunity where we're down to 4 players, right? Lisa, name of the account. But you're doing good, but you're one of 4, right? So if you're one of 4 and you're going to look through POVs and do all of that, has your criteria changed? What is going to be the criteria after you go through 4 POVs? What is going to be the criteria changes? Now that they have everyone's price, one might be price that wasn't such an issue before since they don't have the budget for it. Or maybe once they started looking at everybody's product during a POV, it might have uncovered something else like ease of use or support or something else. And so what we want to do is to make sure in that decision step that we understand what it is. And in many cases, if they're going to make a no decision, right? If the decision is not to do anything, that's a decision. We have to find a way to call that out. Right. So here's where you are in that sales cycle, right? How are you going to pick one of us? And once you pick one of us, how do we go all the way through the procurement process to get out the other side? Right. And to do that, we need to know for every deal where we still haven't been selected or unselected, do we know who all the players are, what the remaining process is, including we pick a winner, we notify the other vendors, and maybe they don't notify the other vendors until they negotiate successfully with the winner. Once you've picked a winner, who does it go to? Does it go to legal? Who does it go to in legal? After legal's done looking at it and making changes, who does it go with in purchasing? Right? Do we know that for all the deals that we're getting ready or in the middle of a POV right now? That's a question. My guess would be no. Some we have some of the pieces. The issue is once your champion is still talking to you, and once your champion is excited because they see that personal win, that's when they're most likely to go find out and help you out. Once they're done, they've made the selection, they've turned it over. It's really awkward at that point for them to go back to purchasing, and it looks as though they're acting on behalf of a vendor. And the bigger the company, the more afraid most people are of doing that. Does that make sense? Because purchasing's like, you give it to me, you go away, we negotiate it. Don't call us, we'll call you. So we went through the decision process the first time, which in Sandler, which was, hey, this is how we qualify our deals to know if we want to invest our time. We need to know when the decision will be made, why you would make the decision to spend the money, right? What it involves, how are you going to make that decision, who's involved, and where does it get done? Sort of like a newspaper reporter. But we've taken that and kind of made it into something that simpler that you can, when I send you these slides, this is something that you can update for each deal, right? It's a Word document. But to go back and think in terms of, for the deals that I'm in a POV now, do I know all the people, including who gets this in purchasing, who gets this in legal? Same as on a renewal. If someone decides that who else other than the person I'm talking to decides whether we're going to renew or not? What are their process steps? Like you have a sales process. What are their process steps? Select a vendor, negotiate terms, do legal, go to purchasing, issue a PO. Does purchasing come back? and negotiate with the vendor, but can they articulate to us what that process is so we understand it? What will be their current criteria? You probably did this at the beginning of the sales cycle and asked them what their criteria would be, but that might have been a year ago, might have been 6 months ago. You want to go back to them again and say, so where you are now, 6 months later, you know, refresh and take a look at this. Where you stand today, what will be your criteria as a team for making a selection? One or two things might have changed. Priorities could change. And then the timeline, so that we're ready to support you, run our business. What's that timeline look like? If we make a technical decision in October, does it go to legal for 2 weeks and then go into purchasing to do whatever Lisa called it, vendor verification, vendor due diligence? Is that another 4 weeks? So if I map that out, we're 2 months away from getting the PO. And then you also want to ask your coach, what would you see as a potential success block? They'll look at you and say, what are you talking about? Well, your guy leaving at the end of October would be something I would identify as a potential success blocker. Someone key to this who's been a big proponent of your solution is leaving. I consider that a success blocker, right? Or at least a layer. The quality of the code, if there was a problem when they first started with it, the amount of time that they have to exert on this. But you want to ask them for any external events, people, activities that could block this from happening for them. Always make it about us mutually. Does that make sense what the success blockers are about? Right?
Yeah. Lauren, can you double check in our close plan if we capture all of this?
Yeah.
All of that makes sense. I think we do that at the beginning. We don't do that throughout the process for things to change.
And your sales cycle is long enough that it could change, especially once players change.
Mm-hmm.
Again, you'll get the recording, you'll get all these slides. So we're going to do a little role playing so that we can go through this. So these are some of the common lies that you'll get when you're at the decision-making process. Who else other than you? Some people might still say, I'm the decision maker. That's just to keep you from going around them or incorporating other people. I don't think there's a single deal you're working on of that size that only has one decision maker. You may ask someone what happens, once the POV goes through if we're selected. They may say something as vague as, well, then we have to socialize this internally. To me, that means we shouldn't have done the POV. So before we do a POV, we should have mapped out everything that was on the prior chart. So if we do a POV and we succeed, what are the remaining steps, people, process, etc., right? You wouldn't want to do a POV only to have them tell you, well, that worked. Now we have to socialize spending this money, etc. That meant you gave a POV to one qualified prospect. Does that make sense to everyone?
No.
And I don't think you're doing that. You'll hear, well, in your case, it was 4, not 7, but we still have to you guys did a great job, but we have to get through the other vendors. Another one we'll role play is we learn who the villain is. What do I mean by that? Hey, if it was up to me, I'd sign with you guys tomorrow. But, Lauren really likes, brand X. Right? So all of a sudden you found out, Lauren got outed. Now you have to have a strategy to get with Lauren and figure out why she wants brand X and how to at least neutralize her vote so she won't block me. We get blocked from the primary contact. There's someone in purchasing, but I can't tell you who it is, and you can't call them, but they'll let you know when they're done. And I think what we're struggling from a lot of this is the vagueness on a timeline. Right? Where is the end of this rainbow? I mean, we should be elated when they've told us you've been selected. Right? And we used to be elated. Now it's like, okay, Is that halfway through the process, a third of the way through the process? Are we 10% of the way through the process? Or is the process just beginning? We've been selected for a while. So we're going to do a role play. We'll give everyone a chance. I'm going to give you only 4 tools to use. Right? So the 4 tools you're going to use, when we go back to that slide, you can use the not okay technique, right? Where you're struggling. To help me out here, help me understand, blah, 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 blah. You could use reversing. When you say you have to socialize, what exactly does that mean? The 2 I would recommend for the second half. So the first 2 are good for when you're trying to understand before you've been selected, before you do a POV, what's the decision process look like? And we'll role play those 2. The second 2 is where you're going to do something that I call, it's one of the Sandler rules, bringing the future forward to the present to solve the problem that you know is going to happen, but the prospect doesn't know. And the problem you can anticipate happening is we get selected and it goes into this black hole and we're on calls where we can't figure out who to talk to, what happens next. Everyone agree that that's a likelihood in big companies, right? So you would use third-party stories and my biggest concern to take that future problem and bring it forward. And what would that sound like? They tell you, no, what happens is once you are selected, we turn it over to legal. They'll probably get back to you with some changes. You already have an MSA, shouldn't be that bad. They'll maybe make some suggestions, changes for over a course of a week or so to your agreement, and then purchasing, can I take anywhere from 2 to 3 weeks to issue a PO. They're telling you how things used to be 20 years ago or 10 years ago. Third-party story would be, listen, that might very well be the case, but lately in companies your size, what we're finding, and it could be the economy in October of 2023 here in the US, what we're finding is our customers have said what you have just said because that's what they believe to be the case. But then when they go, once we're selected, it goes into this kind of black hole where neither they nor we can figure out what the timeline is for legal to get back to us, or even who's working on it in legal. Same as with purchasing. Can you see that happening here? What can you and I agree on doing today, which doesn't include you ghosting me, that you'll be comfortable with me coming back to you to say, no one's talking to me, no one's calling to me. I'm not asking you to negotiate on our behalf, just trying to make the connections happen. And the third party stories is you talk about other companies their size, so they know you're not just making it up. My biggest concern is also almost the same line. Here's my concern. You believe that that's what's going to happen. Have you bought any $1 million, $2 million software this year, right? What we're finding is if deals of this magnitude and you go through the same story, it goes into the black hole. Not only don't we know how long each part's going to take, we don't even know who to engage with in legal or purchasing. So we're not asking you to step out of your lane and do it. We're just asking you to make sure we talk to people because you want this to happen too, so that to the extent these people have time, we could be on the top of the deck and not on the bottom of the deck. And so those 2 are what I would use for that one. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so let's go back and let's try a not okay technique. Who wants to be my first volunteer? When someone says to you, when you say, who else other than you will be involved in this decision? And they say, me, I'm the decision maker. Who'd like to use that the not okay technique of struggling to try to get more out of that person?
But who's playing what? You're playing customer or we're playing customer?
No, you're playing the salesperson.
Yeah.
Right. So customer says to you, hey, I'm the decision maker.
Yeah.
And you know that that's not the case. You know there's going to be other people, but it's clear to them. It's clear to them that at this point they only want you talking to them,
mm-hmm.
which is more understandable on the first date than on like the second, third interaction, right?
Yeah.
So how do you think you would use struggling to get around that or to get clarity there?
No volunteers?
Trying to think of how I would frame the response, walking in those shoes. So what I want to say is something like, we've heard this type of feedback before, but then where I'm struggling is how to tactfully say, why am I just now hearing this? Right? If this is something typically you get in a first or second meeting, not in a fourth or a fifth, right?
No. So Lauren, you go. I think it's for our one-on-one training.
Yeah, I mean, I would say if this is earlier in the sales cycle, I always lighten it up a little bit by being like, wow, you sure have a lot on your plate. So if you were to get to the point of making a decision, what are the next steps that you have to take at that point if you select us as a vendor?
Right.
Okay.
So look,
I will
go ahead.
I will go for third person. You say, Rich, I really appreciate, you're being straightforward with us. We appreciate it. You have a very straightforward decision-making process. Just working with a company of your size, our past experience, just tell us we have a lot of stakeholders. We need to get them involved, whether at the beginning or later stage of the sales process. So who are the possible stakeholders who may have some influence in the process?
Right, because you never want to make it sound like they're not important, right? So you have to make them feel that they're important. Early on in the sales cycle, I struggle and I'd say, listen, I get it. It's our first meeting. And here I am asking you who else is involved. So assuming that, our next session with Rob goes well and you have an interest, right? At some point in the sales process, to further really explore bringing us in, my experience says it's going to be maybe 3 or 4 or 5 other people who want to be involved. I get right now you'd like to understand more about the solution before you do that, and I'm okay with that. But at some point, if that goes well, your CISO and other people are going to want to be involved, and we'll figure out if we want to work together after the next session. We have to figure out when you'll be comfortable doing that. So that lets them know that you basically are saying, listen, when I earn the right for that, we can do it, but we're not going to do this an entire sales cycle without it. Now, let's say it's later on in the sales cycle, and someone might say, well, still thinking that, no, it's not that there aren't decision makers, but there's the key person. Like you mentioned a couple of accounts where you don't have access to that key person, right? And the person underneath you who's your champion is the one you're supposed to go to and kind of arm with all that information. A tactic that I've seen that works is you go to that key person and you say, well, listen, I understand, you want to present this to your boss. How about you and I set up time for me to brief you on that so I can prepare you to present our solution properly to your boss? Typically what will happen, they'll fall for that because they don't want to look bad. Typically what will happen is they'll realize that they don't know as much about your solution as you do, and they can't answer the question. So when your boss says this, when your boss says that, what are you going to say? Then you give them the right answer. And typically during that, they realize, wow, maybe if the three of you have a meeting, you, their boss, and them, it would really be in their best interest because you're going to ask all the same questions that his boss or her boss will ask, and he'll realize he won't have good answers for it. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it's a nicer way of having them realize that.
Yeah.
On the ones in the beginning where we have to socialize it internally, you haven't really done a POV. Maybe you've done a meeting or two, not even some presentations. When they basically say words like socialize is classic for reverse, right? I'm not sure. Does that mean we're going to have a party? When you say socialize, what does that mean? Have them describe what socialize means. When you say, and always start with a stroke when you reverse. And listen, I can appreciate that. Happens a lot. But in your company, when you say socialize, what's that process? I get it. You've just begun. It sounds like you've just begun the search for a solution. But can you help me understand what vetting means in your parlance, right? So when you say you're going to vet, what will that entail? Presentations from everyone, demos from everyone. What is that? And then what are you looking for to cut that down, right? And of course, vagueness. on timeline is another one where you'd want to get reverse. Don't accept fourth quarter, October, someone in purchasing by saying that legal will get back to you. Is that vague? Is there a guy named Joe Legal? Is a woman named Mary Legal? How about purchasing? Harry Purchasing is going to get back to me, Say, listen, I can appreciate that. Do you have any idea who that person, who would get assigned to this? Because here's my concern. It goes into purchasing and they have a stack of things to work on, right? And we're on the bottom, right? And so unless you and I have a plan to move it to the top, it could be in there for, centuries. So is there any way to figure out who that is? Maybe you could make the introduction via an email. So it still looks like you're turning it over to purchasing and you're not getting involved, but at least I have someone to reach out to. As opposed to if you have no one in purchasing's name, what are you going to do? Email everyone in purchasing?
That was the one piece of feedback Vanessa did have about our deck that we shared with her, was that she had not yet lined out the timeline for purchasing. And she was like, that looks very accurate. She's like, that's correct. That is our timeline. And so for us to at least be able to deliver her the timeline to her after she, mentioned that she had never mapped it out yet on paper.
But when she said is her timeline, what does that mean? Is it her timeline from project perspective, or is it her timeline, her hope for purchasing to complete that?
We didn't get much more than that from her. I have noticed anytime I've pushed her for purchasing information or anything like that, she's not in those conversations.
No, because she's the EY consultant. She's not on P&G purchasing. She wouldn't know.
Yeah, so this is all stuff that we're going to have to use on the actual final call with Bill to pay Bill to get to buy-in an agreement.
Right, but then in that case, you're also going to put him on the spot with 15 people in front of him. That needs to be a one-on-one conversation.
Yeah, and Vanessa said, she's like, I'm not sure if he's going to want to have these conversations. She's like, he might, and there's a call before us. So she was going to let us know what the structure was, how Bill handled it, to basically prep us for all our call. So we have at least one vendor going before us.
Yeah. When's our final call?
Final call is next Wednesday.
So most importantly, folks, I want to make sure that the essence of this is, remember we said that your real value to this prospect is your knowledge of what it takes to buy your software, right? All day long you do this, they don't. They're not maybe lying to you. They're being naive to say, hey, in the past, 5 years ago, I bought software. I turned it in. I signed my form. It's in my budget. I turned it over to purchasing. I didn't know that that's now the black hole of Calcutta where people go in to die, right? And so what you want to do is explain to them, here's what's happening in corporate America, right? Here's why I'm asking these questions. If you and I don't have a plan to figure out where it's going in purchasing, where it's going in legal, who's working on it, then this deal, this capability that you want, remember, you go through all the pain. Remember, it's going to make your job easier. It's going to protect your company, everything. This might not happen for a year. That's what we're experiencing. So what would you feel comfortable with you and I putting together, knowing that that's a very likely scenario to happen? How can you and I put a plan in place where we can prevent that from happening? Does that make sense? You want to prevent that from happening.
Yeah.
And so I would think just about every big deal like that, you want to close with that type of thing, right? Because it's what's happening. It's not like a one-off.
I think that will be a conversation I have with the Bill, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it will be our debrief is willing to take that call. I'll have that conversation before the presentation, or it's after the presentation. Either one of that will happen. If it's before the presentation, it sounds like they're already making up their mind which one they're going to go. Otherwise, he wouldn't take my call.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everyone comfortable with that? And same thing on the renewals, right? If someone says, are you seeing the same delay on renewals though? Maybe it's not happening in the renewals where once they tell you we're going to renew, does it ever come out? Does it get as lost as the new deals?
No, I don't let that happen.
Right. So it's really more on the new deals where it's a bigger spend, probably not budgeted or not budgeted enough.
Yeah.
Right. And they're being asked to to justify it 6 ways from Sunday and can be holding back. And the reason why you need to do it when you've redone that pain statement. So, I mean, the best absolute way is you're reviewing the POV. They're telling you how great it was, how much people like it. You go right back to, so the business problems when we first started this, where you couldn't prioritize, you couldn't do this, you were fearful that things would happen and bring the company down. And you go to the personal pain, and you figured that on your watch that you'd be held accountable for it. It really was agonizing, right? The POV is to show you that we can make that all go away, right, and protect you. Here's the last thing, though, that we have to do. And let me share this with you. You've told us we're going to move on to purchasing and legal, etc. Here's what we're experiencing in the marketplace today, given today's economy. And you go through that whole thing. Now, if you want this to happen as much as we do, because it's going to help your company, help you, how can you and I put a plan in place to prevent it? See, you always do the ask after refreshing the pains. The pains wear off too, right? So remember why you want this. Remember why you were excited about doing it. Remember why you're going to spend the money. And now it could still not happen. So let's make sure that somebody else doesn't, spit in the punch bowl, so to speak. Horrible analogy, but. Okay.
Yep.
Any other questions on that? But that's what's known as bringing the future, a problem that you know will happen in the forward to the present. Right? You know it's going to happen. They don't know it. You've won. You tell them about it. How can we prevent it from happening? Let's put a plan in place so that what you want, Mr. and Mrs. Prospect, what you want isn't taken away from you, isn't withheld. Okay. Anything else on the sales skills side, or anything else that you wanted to talk about?
So
Remember,
I have one deal. Go
what?
ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, once you have in the beginning, before you do a POV, once you understand the entire decision process, right, including what happens once you're selected, do they have the budget? Do they have to go back and verify it? You have to decide whether they're still qualified or disqualifying from doing a POV, because that's your biggest effort, right? And you can only have so many of those going on at a time. How many active POVs could NopSec handle nowadays? One at a time, two at a time?
At one point, we have 4 at the same time, but all at the different stages.
Right. But it's a big investment of time, right? And so it could be something in that decision process where it looks like the money hasn't been fully allocated or is going to be decided in a way that no one can tell you, where you might basically go back to them and say, listen, in order for us to make this investment, you have to help us understand the remaining part of that picture if we're selected better. Because the worst thing to do is to be light on that, do the POV, get a technical win, and then you're still like circling an airplane, circling the airport, never landing, right? Because they can't tell you how do we close this.
Yeah, I agree. I still think we have a tendency getting into POV earlier. In the perfect world, POV should be just close, check off the box, the last stop. Now we're still like, we're front loaded all the work, and then we don't have visibility of a procurement, anything else, even after we win the POV. Because we don't have access to all the people, but then also bring back is we need to ask ask for access early on. Yeah. Yeah, that shows the people are involved in the POV from customer side have not bought things in the past.
Mm-hmm.
And not only that, put yourself now in the customer's point of view. You've been selected. That means they like you, they like the company, they like the solution, they like what it's going to provide. You've told them something that might happen. They're going to go back and verify, and they're going to find out that what you told them was right, and they're going to view you as a trusted advisor. Because they're going to be like, yeah, you were right. If we don't map this out, it goes into a generic inbox workflow. We don't know who in purchasing gets it. We don't know who in legal gets it. I don't know. You don't know. We kind of wait for something to come out of the oven that may or may not happen based upon priorities, right?
Yeah.
I envision it going into a big SAP, purchasing, workflow inbox, and whoever it gets assigned and who's going to watch over it, and who knows.
Yeah. Okay, I have a question for you. We have this account called One Main Financial. We renewed 4 years. This year in July, we did not renew. One reason is the budget was with the CISO, and CISO just removed a bunch of tools, simplify rationalization. And then our relationship was not that great with CISO. The CISO is fairly new. Our relationship has been great with technology operations. And there are 2 people from technology operation at the managing director at the head of the department came to our cab a week ago, even though they're not paying customer literally right now because their subscription ends in July. We had this conversation before,
Did
right?
you charge him a cover charge for lunch?
So now I had a conversation even at the cab, but we had a one-on-one. We said, hey, we have to bring it back. There's a use cases. And then one MD is more pro us. The other one is more of the boss and control the budget. I have a way bigger budget. If he wants to buy, he will have the budget to buy. Kind of a hold off. He said, we still need more improvement, XYZ. And then even the MD said, this is not only a product, this is a relationship, is a journey. So now we're in the pickle, right? They came to a cab, they get all the fancy presentation and then the keynote panel, all of that. So I said, we need to get back this year. And he said, oh, this year. He just playing dumb, right? I said, I need to explain to the board. We have 2 people come to our cab. They're not customer. And I explained we have a delayed renewal, but it needs to happen. So you need to help me, guide me through the process. How can we make this happen? Previously, the excuse is, oh, we're waiting to hire this person. This person going to start in July. Of course, they did not start in July. And he said, oh, in the end, he didn't take our offer. He doesn't want to relocate. All the same bullshit
Somehow
excuses.
that's their problem. The guy didn't take their offer, so somehow
exactly.
that's your problem.
Exactly, right? So how can you call the bullshit without saying the bullshit and then get back up? I said, I cannot explain to the board. We're there for 4 years. So what has changed? And then the team, both of these 2 spending cycles with them, and in the end, not continuing.
Well, I would ask them to, I would basically, hopefully everything that you presented has NopSec confidential property of NopSec on it, right? So that they can't use it in a presentation. You should, in somewhere in the email, you want to drop, you're left with if you gave them copies of your presentations, that's NopSec confidential for our customers. So please make sure you don't disseminate it or vote it on or whatever, right? That kind of gives them a little scariness, right? Because they really shouldn't have left with that. What sounds like they did was come for the classic free consulting, right? They came, figured, what are you going to do? Turn me away? Somehow they got in, got the free consulting. Now, I would go back to them and basically say, how do we create a plan to make you be a customer again, right? What is it that you would, how do we create a win-win where you come back and are paying customer? Therefore, we've solved the issue of the cab. More important, if you weren't interested, why did you come? Right? I mean, you came because you either have a problem, you want to know what's going on, you have an interest, right? And so I would start out with asking them what they think would be a fair approach on payment back to you to start the part of being a customer again. Always let them throw out that first number.
Yeah. So I need to get this on the call with the both parties, both guys to join our cab together to have that conversation. I can send an email. Thank you for participating, blah, blah, blah. And then would love to regroup to understand what's the path forward to become a customer again. And I just come off a board meeting. I can just put as that. So let's just schedule a time. And then I need to get Lauren or some of our salespeople to be on the call, or whether it's customer success, just to talk through it, to keep on the record, because this guy is always sleazeball, sneaky, trying to, oh, I'm always your friends or advisor. We always do everything for you guys, just without paying us, to take money away from us.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I would transcribe the call. You could use that phantom product or something else, but have a call with them. You transcribe it, and then you send them the highlights of it. But you want to be careful not to push it so far that it looks like a legal proceeding. But you just want to be firm that basically says, look, you coming, sitting through the cab, having no plans to be a customer is unacceptable. You know that, and I know that, right? So I'm looking for you to come back with how we're going to resolve this. You come back to being a customer. I'd like to get this resolved in the next 60 days. When I talk to give them a time frame, right?
Yeah.
Where maybe you renew starting today instead of the back renewal, right? Whatever it is, but renew, become back a customer again. And we'd love for you have to be the cab. But coming to the cab meeting, not being a cab, right? And now I'm not getting any clear direction on when you are coming back. That's just not right. I don't think you're comfortable with that. I know I'm not.
Yeah. Okay, so do you suggest I do an email to both of them? Because one is reporting to the other.
We go to the top guy.
Yeah.
You want to have it. You want to have the conversation you and I are just having, mano a mano. If I'm on with my boss now, I can't look weak to my manager and to my employee. You want to get the top guy and just say, listen, friend to friend, here's what happened. We got to remedy it. And more likely to be concession and admit guilt alone than if his employee is on.
Yeah. Yeah. But then I need to have this in the conversation. It's not going to be an email.
Right, no, conversation. You
Yeah.
got to have an email. It's just to set up the Zoom meeting, and I would have my bullets just go through this. Very friendly, matter of factly, but listen, we got to resolve this, right? And so I want you in the cab. The first letter C in cab is customer, but you're not. You could be on advisor.
We talk so many times.
Right. But lest we forget, we call it cab,
God.
but it's really customer. Of course, that's only if you're laughing and being facetious. How do we remedy it? Right? Because you have to make it clear if he's not going to remedy it, he can't show up again. Right?
Yeah.
So
but
the more you talk about
sure,
remedying it.
Right. But I was more of thinking about, hey, he's already here. You cannot really, return back, right? I just put it as hey, I really have a hard time at board meeting to ask why we're not renewing this account. I cannot defend it. They said they came to your cab as your customer, but you're saying you have a great relationship, but this account is not renewed. We cannot defend that. And you have to really help me figure out the plan.
So that's why I'm asking you today to help me resolve this. How can we resolve this?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Okay. Good. Are you guys good?
Good. So I will send you the PDF of this